mid-2024, MiHoYo, or known as HoYoverse, released an action combat video games called Zenless Zone Zero. The games are promoted with an urban theme, where the world building is focused on city streets and build up urban environments. Later on, this team became a trendsetter for other gacha games, such as Project Mugen, Neverness to Everness, Wang Yu, Tianzi 76, and a lot more. Upon looking at other game trailers that give a lot of freedom in the environments around the city, Zenless feel like less of an urban. But the question is, why? Is it because the city environment is quite small and a city looks like a small town, which is probably because the game is still in its early year when this video was made? But if we explore the world, we can see a high amount of detail that can be seen around the city. We can feel the environment more immersive as an urban theme. Yet, you still feel something not right, or there is a border that separates your understanding and the game design itself. But why and what is it? What did we miss from Zenless world design? The answer to that question is because Zenless is not designed based on urban world. Zenless Zone Zero is fantasy. If we look back to the game itself, it was promoted as urban fantasy instead of just as an urban game. According to the Oxford Dictionary, fantasy is described as existing only in imagination, proceedingly merely from imagination, fabulous, imaginary, unreal. In short, fantasy situations are either activities, environments, or conditions of something that exists from a thought that is unlikely to happen according to real worlds. But even as a fictional, fantasy has a category of limitations. For example, we don't call Gundam fantasy, even though it was fictional. Meanwhile, based on the Cambridge Dictionary, fantasy is defined as a type of story or literature that is set in imaginary world, often involving traditional myths and magical creatures, and sometimes ideas or events from real world, especially from the middle period of history. At this point, labeling Zenless as fantasy seems not right, because the setting is not medieval and there is no magic in it. To understand that structure, we need to first jump into Zenless world. In the game, you play as Percy who guide those who enter the Hollows, which agents are being hired to complete the mission and get paid for their shares of contributions. Agents come with the various factions, which are mostly in a group of 4 to 5 people. But most of the time, Percy are not accredited by the University Administration. This is because their work are outside the boundary of the law, technically illegal missions. As a normal citizen in New Eridu, they can go to the right channel. For example, they can express their request on NAPS, and NAPS will process it and handle it for HIA. HIA will involve with either SOS or Defense Force regarding the issue, which is controlling the traffic of people that enter and get out of the Hollows. In general, this is how Zenless daily life works. If we see the world building has a lot of modern settings, like NAPS as a police federation, the Defense Force as the army, and HOS as SWAT. By understanding this factor, now we feel more far from proving Zenless as fantasy worlds. Now, if we jump back to fantasy world, which focusedly based on anime trope, we basically can understand how their world building works. Fantasy genre in anime, we are always associated with mercenary. A mercenary will join the guild to get a quest and receiving a reward based on the quest and repeat the process. It sounds familiar, right? Let's repeat. Adventurer in a group of 4 to 5 people create a party to handle the missions as a team. Each adventurer comes with a varying class. For example, we have paladins, guardians, alchemists, assassin, monk, swashbuckler, and hunter. Receiving a mission from a clerk who get a mission by the guild, which later enter into the dungeon. If that open your minds, we're going to highlight the last one, the dungeon. If we back to version 1.0, every time we enter a holo, we will get hit by one adventuring mechanic that receive a lot of feedback from the players, which is the TV system. But if you realize, the TV system is an old mechanic that has existed since 1975, as the first dungeon crawler genre has been introduced for tabletop games. A dungeon crawler is a type of scenario in fantasy role-playing games in which heroes navigate a labyrinth environment, battling various monsters, avoiding traps, solving puzzles, and looting any treasure they may find. These include rewards, artifacts, and mysteries of the past. In Zenless Zone Zero, we have two gameplay that strictly follow this genre. For example, RPG Falls and Holo Zero. Based on early feedback, this mechanic almost get butchered by players, removing Zenless' unique identity. But later on, the devil brought it back due to demands from the fanbase. The word dungeon comes from French donjon, which means keep, the main tower of castle. The first recorded instance of the word in English was near the beginning of the 4th century, when it held the same meaning as donjon. A dungeon, mostly referred to as oubliette, same origin as French oublier, meaning to forget. Is a basement room that is accessible only from a hatch or hole in a high ceiling. In anime, a dungeon is mostly born from a ruin of a castle from previous civilization, whether the top building has been destroyed over time, leaving only the dungeon part. A dungeon is mostly built with complex mapping and traps to prevent a prisoner from escaping. This creates a complicated maze where a person inside the dungeon has to reroute path or take a risk with the trap. In Zenless Zone Zero, there is a lot of fallen capital creating the same condition. With a lack of technology and exploration, a city known as a simple place to walk can be hassle to navigate. Some areas have been blocked, and some places cannot be accessed. This creates a complex maze as a dungeon. With Hollow Monster, it makes a dungeon more challenging, where some monster camping at certain area make it more challenging to the dungeon life. Over the year, these monsters might evolve based on their condition in terms of survival, such as miming. On a smaller scale, there is a ton of similarity that you can see from factions to the gameplay, where overall they are more fun to fantasy story. But this analysis doesn't end here. We are going to bring you to the final and the biggest info. Zenless introduced their biggest flaw in video format without hiding it in the game story or even gameplay. If we look at the bigger map, Zenless world building is split into two: the ruins of the old capital and the new Erudum. This type of rules design is very familiar in fantasy genre, where one side is a developed tree, while the other side are remaining of civilization. For example, this type of map can be seen in animes such as in the military, we have a hero of White Hunter who is preventing the Hollows from expanding and securing the safety of the citizens. Meanwhile, on the new evil sides, there are a number of races such as humans, animal persons, elf, oni, vampires, and dragons. Well, there is another one. You can consider Piper as halfling, which been explained on Bernie's agent trust that call Piper as half people. Overall, you can see how this world design works for fantasy. But there is a final question to this discussion. Before we explore the magic, first we need to understand what is magic. Some people believe that magic is just a sign with a trick, and some consider it involves spiritual energy. In Zenless, we don't see both of these acts. There is no person with a wand or a magical circle. Everyone is using technology. Besides, magic in fantasy are usually related with blessing and holy power. But until at this point, we don't see any act of worshipping. But if we step back and try to remember, there is one answer that points to right directions. In Zenless event, roaming to the Ether, we having an info regarding a cult group that might take this as worshipping. According to the Space Binary, they state us to be refined, which referring to become a very polite person and have a good manners. But searching a blessing in a hollow are kinda strange, which means this faction that call us the Order are corrupted believer, which means there is someone else who have the holy power. Before we talk about that, magic differs between people, the same as the term that we can hear in Zenless world. Based on the law, ether aptitude can fluctuate with age, stress, and physical well-being. These mechanics are kinda similar with the mana, yet we cannot see it as a magic because it doesn't behave in that way. In a world of fantasy, magic is not always stuck in medieval era. If we look on a wider perspective, magic genre are quite popular, mostly regarding Maho Shoujo, or you know it as magical girl. Magical Girl is a subgenre of primarily Japanese fantasy media, including anime, manga, light novel, and live action, centered on young girls who possess magical ability. which they typically use throughout an ideal alter ego into which they can transform. If this kind of familiar to you, means you already know the answer. We know idol behave as a singer, but in this discussion context, the idol faction having a all checkmark to be a group that own a magic, young girl who possess magic ability. Besides, one of the character can transform into her alter ego, Yutane Yofiel. This faction not just behave as cute girl as an idol who looks like a magical girl, they are also carrying the name of Archangel, which representing the holy dominance. Now we can see a bigger picture where the order searching for blessing and the idol having the holy energy. So as for the conclusion, Zenless has all the checkmark for being a fantasy world. Just how they express can change the way we perceive them. For example, any fantasy anime focus on medieval era, but throughout the story, their world once had a great civilization. In timeline, we can see how time can change how the world shapes. And Zenless was on this point. The direction of the world can change based on how they perceive and live on it. If the civilization survive, they can perceive a new form of technology and civilization. But with the dying of technology day by day, pushing the civilization to the old ways of living, this will bring humanity back to the medieval era